welcome to another episode of Coffee with Genially. My name is Carla. I'm the country marketer for the US at Genially. And today I am really excited about this episode because we're going to be talking about a skill that I value a lot. It's something that we are all born with, but sometimes as we grow older, we tend to lose. If you have read the title of this video, you know we'll be talking about creativity. And today I am joined by the wonderfully creative Misty Kluesner. She's an educator, designer, and digital innovation coach who spent her career helping learners of all ages tap into their creativity through design thinking, play, and storytelling. Welcome, Misty.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. We met at ISTE last year and we had a really nice conversation. So I thought, who is better for episode on creativity than you? Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Always love to nerd out about creativity.
Awesome. So to maybe understand you a little bit more and maybe see your background, I want to ask you what you drew you to design thinking and as a framework, and how did it change the way that you approach teaching and learning?
Um, so I learned about design thinking when I was a digital innovation coach from my administrator, Tammy, and I really loved how it puts people at the center. It's all about, right? It's not like what I want, it's not what other things want, it's what humans want, and especially with education. I think that's really important because it's all about the students. And I also love that it's all about iteration. As a perfectionist, I need to hear that it's okay if it's not perfect the first time, and that we're going to learn from what doesn't work and we're going to make it better. And I think also for children, I think that's really powerful because they also tend to get stuck in that here's my one thing, it's done, and I move on. So those two things really kind of pushed me to see how powerful that process is with getting creativity and creative thinking and pushing it to the next level. I think with teaching, it's just such an unknown, right? What works with one student or one classroom doesn't necessarily work with others. And so I love the idea that you're testing and iterating all the time to see like what works and what is best for each human
Yeah.
versus kind of like a band-aid, right? For everything. So that's kind of what drew me to it and why I love it so much.
And sometimes when we think about design thinking, the first, well, I mean, all the process, but especially I think the beginning of the process, we think a lot about creativity, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes I feel like educators or people in general just think, well, creativity is nice to have. But why do you think that is misconception that it's just like something nice to add on, but it's not something necessary in the process?
Um, that's a good question. And I know I was guilty of this, can still be, and I think people I talk to are guilty of this all the time, is that when we think of creativity, we tend to say it's for the fine arts, right? It's like I'm an artist, I can draw, I can sing, I can perform music. And so they get we stuck on this creativity as a thing and not a way of thinking. And so I think it's trying to change that mindset of what creativity actually is. I love there's a book that by David Kelly from IDEO that came out called Creative Confidence. And it's all about how we all are creative in different ways. And I love that idea that you just have to figure out where does your creativity shine. I know many people where their creativity is in the kitchen. You put me in the kitchen, and unless I'm following a recipe, you don't want to eat it. But there are people where you can just put things in front of them and it's magical, right? And they create the most delicious things. So I think that is the challenge is reframing what creativity is from like a thing to like how do you think, where are you taking these new ideas, mixing them together, creating something different, creating something new that wasn't there before. Um, and I think it's also important for educators to realize how important that skill is. I mean, when we think about um, like what educate or what corporations are valuing, what different jobs are valuing, creativity is always on that list, right? Creative thinking. So I think it's also important to think about we need to teach our kids these skills and help them understand what those skills are versus just pushing it to the side and hoping their elective teacher covers it.
When you say sometimes we're creative in certain areas like the kitchen, do you think there's a way to transfer that creativity into something that we want to get better at?
Oh, 100%. And I think, I mean, really what it comes down to is so for example, if the kitchen is where your creative confidence is, right? That's where you shine. Chances are that when you first started cooking, you were not very good. I mean, I have a 6-year-old son and I know that it's chaos in the kitchen when he tries to make things. But something about that process you enjoyed, there was something that drew it to you. And so you kept spending time there. Even if you failed, you would work through those failures and you would figure out, right, analyze what worked, what didn't, and you would take that and learn from it. And it's taking that right there, right, that willingness to push through failure, that willingness to analyze it and take and iterate and play with it. Um, and transferring that to any other area you want to grow in. And so I think it's the key to that is if you have to do it, it's going to be hard and it's going to be a slog. So you have to find a way in your brain to change that have to want to or get to, right? That reframing is really important. And then you can come in with that mindset of just experimentation, being willing to fail, learn through that failure, and you will get better. It just,
Yeah.
when you don't see the fun initially, right? We don't want to push through that tough part in the beginning.
I saw a word when I was looking at your profile, a very recurring word, which was play. And when you talk about play in learning, how does that look in practice? How can play coexist when we are talking about academic goals and learning?
Um, I like to think of it's kind of like creativity, right? When we think about like creativity, it's a skill or a mindset versus a thing. I like to think play is more of that as well, right? It's the state of mind that we go into. I mean, the thing that most of us think of when we think about play is like playing games, right? So when we play a game, generally like thinking about like why do you play a game? What exists to make that play piece of the game there? And it's usually that you're willing to take risks because the worst thing that's going to happen is it's a game, right? You say, well, it's just a game, whatever. I don't care if I lose, right? Um, I know I tell my son all the time, win or lose, did you have fun? That's the goal, right? So it's that mindset. Usually it's a lot of games are collaborative or you're in a community, which I think is really powerful, right? Having that piece of like working off of someone else and like built working together toward a goal. Or if you are more of a competitive person, that competitive piece that drives you to be better. And I think that is kind of like the key is that state of mind. And how do we get into that state of mind when we're doing things? I love watching, if I want to learn, just walk into like a preschool or a kindergarten classroom and just watch kids when they're trying to do something new. Because they turn everything into games, right? Like they want to get even my son, right? Like just changing in the morning turns into a game of basketballs. How many times can we get like, this piece of clothing into the laundry hamper? And how far away can I make it? So it's just trying to, I think, find the fun even in the most mundane things. And that can be hard. And this is like when I actually love if you're doing stuff with students, like open it up to them. Go into some co-design. Like how can we work together? Like where do you all see the fun in this? Um, like get them to contribute to that idea of like how can we make this fun, how can we make it bring the joy, like what's the fun, or even if you watch your kids, like where do you see them light up, and that's the area to really focus on. But I think the biggest piece is leaving anything that you're designing, if you want to bring an element of play into it, is that moment of exploration and kind of like that culture of being free to take risks and to try things that might not work. And if you can build that into something, you're going to see that, like, at least that mindset of play come in a lot more in the classroom.
Do you have any maybe example or tip that you can give the audience on how to maybe incorporate that gamification in the classroom? Do you have any maybe process that you always go through when you're creating like a game for a class?
I think a lot of it is choice. So I think if you can create some choice for people, I think that's helpful. So sometimes, I mean, even like, right, if maybe you're doing something to do with science and you want to have them, eventually they have to create this lab and they have to write up this lab report. But can you give them some like, options or choices to get from point A to point B? And then from there, like that's like the first basic thing of providing that exploration. If you want to like gamify it, then usually then, right, you're going to have some challenges that are worth points, ways that they could like level up. And so there's a lot of research that like you can, and like there's so much stuff on the internet that you can go and like have, and they can help you, like you can kind of see how to build out gamification. Um, but even at its most basic, like right, first thing with games is you don't have a set path of A, B, C, D, right? Like to get from A to D, you can go left, you can go straight, you can go right. And so I think even just starting with that of just some choice, and ways for them to kind of take something and build off of it and build off like of one another, I think that's going to be like the first step to it. And then from there, you can start to build rules into it. You can start to do points. You can start to do like the level ups, things like that.
Do you have any example of either like a classroom or a professional learning experience where you think that design thinking changed the outcome?
Yeah. So in my last role, I was in charge of all of the professional development for our coaches and trainers. And they were contractors. So that meant that anything they came to, it had to be voluntary. They weren't getting paid. It's very similar to like teacher PD after school, right? Like you're coming because you want to come. You're not coming because you have to come, or you're getting paid by the learning, not by anything else. So you had to make that experience valuable to them. And so trying to figure out how to do this was a challenge. And so I used the design thinking framework. And one of the main things that I did with that was really focusing on that brainstorming and ideating phase of like trying to come up with different options. And I used an ideating protocol called mashup, where you take two things and you kind of mash them together to kind of see how what might happen if you might take this and turn it into something else. And that mashup was how might we Starbucksify or like coffee shopify the like learning experience, like the personalization, the choice, things like that. And from that, I got a few ideas, and I actually got permission from my manager to pilot three of them. So I got to actually try three and test them and see what worked. And that let me really start to iterate and really figure out like what was the one that actually drew people to the training. And it was not the one I thought it would be. So if I had been told I have to, spend all this time researching, provide the market research, provide all the background, and say, okay, this is the choice I'm going to go with, I probably wouldn't have been successful because I wouldn't have chose the one that worked. So permission from, the people in charge to like try things. It's okay if they don't work. Test some things out. I think that was key, is having that permission to fail, that permission to try different things. And then also having that opportunity to just rapidly iterate and like, that bias toward action versus researching for months and hoping this one idea actually works.
From those three tests, which one do you think, or what was the least impactful one?
It was
Or
the Starbucks one. The
okay,
one that I was like, "Oh, this is so cool." Like, let me like, and it was like, how do you like, because I tried to gamify it, kind of like how the Starbucks app, right? When you show up, you get points,
yeah,
whatever. And like that wasn't something that drew people to PD. But I thought that was like, oh, this is gonna be so fun. Like we can so like I love games and I love gamification, but it is also not always the answer depending on your audience, right? And that's what I love about design thinking, is that it's about the human that is actually getting that experience and like focusing on what they need and what they want. But yeah, that was the one that like we kept some elements of it, but like that was definitely not the one that was the
had the most
most
impact.
successful. Yeah.
How can instructional designers or teachers maybe start small and bring more creative problem solving to their lessons, their training?
Um, that's a good question. I think it's kind of a twofold piece. I think the first part you have to make sure is that the content you're using lends itself to that. Not all content is going to lend itself to creativity and problem solving. Sometimes you just have to memorize stuff, and that's just how it is. And we all have been there. And I also think being transparent about like, hey, you just need to know this. Here you go.
Yeah.
Um, but I think if you have content that lends itself to that critical thinking, that creative thinking, problem solving, then that's where you start. You play with that content, and then I think the next thing is really thinking about what skills are you activating in this. So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, so OECD, they actually did a big research paper, and they identified four skills that are kind of instrumental in anything that requires creative thinking. And it's inquiring, imagining, doing, and reflecting. So basically, right, are you getting them to be curious? Are you having them ask questions? Are you sparking something in them to make them actually want to engage with this content? A lot of times that's figuring out like what that personal connection is. For imagining, right, you're giving them the opportunity to explore, to play with ideas, to come up with ridiculous, radical things that they might be able to play with. A lot of times, and do you have a culture where you are where that's okay? A lot of times, right, we're too scared to share that radical idea because we don't want it to fail. We don't want to be laughed at, right? So also creating that culture where they feel safe. Doing means they're making something, right? There's got to be something that they make or produce or create. It can be with paper and tape, that's fine, but something that they're doing with this learning. And then reflecting, which always seems to get forgotten about, right? Like when you're done, building space to reflect on the process, reflect on what they created, because that's really, I think, where that important, the actual like learning of the skills happens. So I think if you kind of do those things, you have a pretty good chance of activating those skills.
Yeah, you mentioned reflecting, and I think we have had different sessions on gamification, and that's something always comes up. Reflection, it's so important for any type of activity, because then they won't know what went right, what went wrong. You won't know their feedback of how to improve your lesson. So yeah, definitely, I think it's very important. And when you talk about culture, that relates to our next question. Um, there's places that naturally you feel comfortable in, that you feel like you can try new things, that you can make mistakes, right? Is there any things that you see in these environments where trying, failing, are actually, it's safe for them to do this, it's encouraged? Is there any specific things that you see in these places where this things are encouraged?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is more than anything, the places I know that I felt this the most and that I've seen in other places is it's modeled from the top down. So that means admin or whoever your leader is has to model this for the teachers or whoever's on staff, right? Because the teachers also have to feel safe that they can create these types of learnings versus like going through, their curriculum plan and checking off day one, day two. So I think having it modeled from the very top to all the way down to the students is key. Teachers modeling, right? Like I made a mistake, it's okay, what did I learn, and like actually sharing like what am I learning from this mistake, I think is huge, because students seeing that is going to be very important. And then I think the other piece is being very cognizant of how you react when a mistake is made.
Mm,
Do you skip it, move on? Do you just mark it, right? Is it the red pen that comes out and then we move on? Do we use it as a learning opportunity? Even if it's like a one-on-one conversation, right? But I think those key pieces of just how do we react to mistakes? How do we react to failure? And constantly, as you know, if I'm a teacher, constantly reflecting on like how did I handle that situation, I think is really important. um, and teaching kids the language on how to approach that, right, both with themselves and with one another. So a lot of modeling is key for that, to still start to build that up. And then you also need to do things that just build trust, right? You're not gonna No one's gonna be willing to try something radical if they don't trust who's around them. So non-academic areas are a great place to start. If you do any community building, any games or like warm-ups with your students, that's a great place. With schools, right, trying to do things that build that community with one another, um, are key, because you don't want to have that, you have to have that foundation of trust before anyone's going to be willing to. So like if you are listening to this and then the next day you go in and try to do some crazy idea but your kids don't have that, you're not going to get anything, right? So you're going to have to spend that time building that foundation with them and help them get to know one another and trust one another. They don't have to like one another, it's not going to happen, but they can trust one another.
it's trust them. When you talk about modeling from the top, what are some ways that this can be done in a realistic way, like some first steps towards creating this environment of creative problem solving?
um that Yeah, so the first thing I always tell people to be is to just be curious. So a lot of times we kind of get stuck in just like we focus on like what we see and we have an automatic reaction to what it is, and we kind of go into our like default mode of like how we're going to solve it or react to it. So I always like to invite people to just kind of sit and observe whenever you can. And that might, if you can actually like watch what's happening, that's great. If it's you need to just pause and like reflect on the day and like observe like just from your memories of the day and like write that down, that's fine. I love making what's called a bug list. So anything that bothers you, right? Like anything that bugs you, you just write it down. Because if it bugs you, it's a problem. And I love doing these with my classroom too. We just have a bug wall, and kids would just put sticky notes on there, and then that would give us problems to like solve and work toward, work on as a class. So I think that's the first step is kind of that approaching the world of curiosity, wondering, just kind of looking for things that could be a problem. And then the next thing I think is also reframing. So usually, right, when we get something, you're like, oh, I have to, or like maybe you have a student, you're trying to figure out how to get a student to participate more in class, and you just go, oh, Diana never participates. Like, and like we go into this automatic like shutdown. It's Diana's fault. There's nothing I can do about it. And maybe we could reframe that to be something more of how might we get students who don't feel comfortable to feel safe in class to share. Um, and so now it's something that is within your locus of control, right? I can't control what Diana does, but I can control the community or the culture I create in my class. And I love that frame of how might we, because how might we lends itself to like all those possibilities, right? It's not like a one path or one direction that we can go in. So those are kind of the two things I like to think about is the observation, like being curious about the world, and also trying to like open up your span a little bit of what you're seeing and what you're observing, and then reframing it into something that is not negative and also is something that could, is within your locus of control, something that you could actually tangibly work toward finding solutions to.
How do you personally manage conflict when, so when we're talking about problem solving, there's gonna be a lot of ideas when we brainstorm, and sometimes I feel like especially classrooms, sometimes professionally, but there can be ideas that kind of go against each other, and that might make it might make people not feel so great about sharing their ideas anymore. How do you
Mhm.
manage that personally?
So the biggest thing is whenever you do brainstorming, research has shown like independent brainstorming first, because the minute you share, you have that minute of like I'm gonna get judged, and that shuts you down from putting stuff down. So I always try to have students or adults, whoever I'm working with, like 5 minutes independent brainstorm, write all your ideas down. And then we tend to just go around, and it's, you have to establish norms. So you do need to go through, IDEO has some great norms for brainstorming. And just you need to go through those norms and make sure that the biggest thing with kids, right, or adults or anybody, is suspend judgment. So that means for myself, that means for you, right? It means for the teacher, like suspend judgment. Um, get that idea out. Then I like to also cluster groups. You will find things that will kind of go together. And usually if you have people working in groups or independent, is they'll kind of pick two or three to move forward. So you don't try to narrow it down to one.
Okay.
Just like what I got to do, right? When my last role, like I had three options and I got to try them out. So I think if you actually can move forward with a few ideas, at least into like the prototyping stage, I think that's powerful. And I think it would, if you do have ideas that are like totally opposites, like that's even more powerful to see like which one actually will, right, like be more impactful.
Yeah.
Um, because sometimes, we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of times we shut down an idea because it goes, maybe we have preconceived notions of how it might work, but whoever posited that idea obviously does not. So I, again, that curiosity piece and that openness piece, I think is key to that.
Awesome. I know you've worked across districts and statewide programs, and we already talked about a little bit about culture and environment to encourage design thinking and creative problem solving. But have you noticed anything about the environment where creative problem solving thrives? Like once you have that environment, have you noticed anything in the people, in their outcomes, that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing, like more than anything, right, is that culture that supports risk taking, that supports trying things. So first thing before anything is building that trust. And I think the other thing with education is that we need to build space to play. That can be physical spaces, that can also just be time, right? A lot of times, like every minute, especially kids today, every minute of their day is prescribed. And teachers, right? Like they're lucky if they can use the bathroom before lunchtime most of the time. So I think it's putting that breathing space back into the day, because your brain is not going to work it creatively, is not going to go into that creative thinking mode if you are just trying to check things off a list. That doesn't lend itself to that thinking. So creating that space and time for both the teachers and the students to be able to sit with things, to chew with them, to play with those ideas. Um, and if you can also create physical spaces where they can go and like actually like play. I mean, once you leave elementary school, at least where I am in California, there aren't playgrounds anymore, right? So like there's nothing that physically tells kids go play on their campus anymore. So if
Yeah.
you can find ways to do that, that's even better, because that just again, like we've all seen like the little like TikTok videos, someone draws us hopscotch on the sidewalk and people will start playing on the hopscotch, right? Like, so how can we get that happening in our kids? Um, and I also think just opportunities for cross pollination across subjects. So usually creativity happens because we're taking two unrelated ideas and we're finding a way to bring them together to make something new. But if math always stays in math class, science always stays in science class, right? Music always stays in music class, PE is always, in the gym, they never get to see how might we find a way to connect science and PE and where do those come together. So I think also finding whether it might be like a collaborative project across
Mm.
classes. At campus I worked at, we did every year we did a school-wide design thinking project.
Okay.
And so every grade, every student did their own design thinking project. They could work solo or in groups, but that was a chance for everyone to kind of just think big, solve problems. And they got to reach out to any teacher or expert on campus that they needed for that, whether they had that class or not. So I think just those opportunities to cross pollinate between subjects so that kids can really see how these ideas can come together. Because, in the real world, like things aren't silos. So, like, how do we give them those opportunities to actually try that?
I love that. Yeah, I it resonates with me. I think when the best ideas comes when you mix things up and when there's
Mhm.
like also diversity of thinking, where people are
Yes.
from different backgrounds and they have different solutions for the same problem. Sometimes, those are the best ideas. All right, to end up, if you could challenge every educator or learning designer to try a creative experiment this week, what would it be?
The one that I love, and I try to do this to myself because I'm guilty of it as well, is just mixing up your routine. Again, like right, it's that blinders thing. Just like with problems, like we get so set on like how we do this or how we get from here to there, and so we go into like this default mode. We don't even think about it, and so our brain just kind of follows this pathway, and there's no like recognition or like thinking about it. So I always like to think about like what's a routine that you have. It might just be like how you get, like the order that you do things in the morning, getting ready. It might be the way you drive to get to the grocery store, the path you walk your dog in the evening, and just take that and mix it up and see what happens. So, like, if you always take this path to walk your dog, what would happen if you took that path today? Or what would happen if you turned right there instead of turning left on your drive to the grocery store and you took like just a different pathway? Um, it might be less efficient, and that's okay. But what happens is because it's novel, it's going to make your brain start to think and it's going to start to make new pathways in your brain. And so I always like it because it's something simple. It's everyone can do it. And it's something that I try to challenge myself to do like once a month. Is just what's something that's become a rut that I can just mix up. I might hate it. I've actually found some things like, oh, that actually works a lot better. Why wasn't I doing this before? So it's just something simple that you can, and challenge your students to do it too, right? Like something simple that just kind of wakes your brain up a little bit and gets it thinking in a different way.
Even like seating arrangements, right? Because sometimes we always,
Hmm.
even if there's no seating arrangements, we tend to always sit in the same place.
Yep.
We do. So maybe switching that up and having students kind of interact with other people that are different from the ones that they regular do. So
Yep.
yeah, that's really
Exactly. Like,
nice too.
yeah. No, I love that. I
Maybe
love it. I
like,
love putting it on the
like
students, challenge them to do
yeah.
it, right?
Well, thank you so much, Misty. This was a great conversation. And I hope to see you soon also, maybe in the next EST, right?
Yeah,
Um,
crossing my fingers.
crossing fingers. Yeah, it's this year is in Orlando, right?
It is. It's in Disney Mecca.
Nice, nice one. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation for today's coffee with Genially. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to Misty and I.
Thanks for having me.
Bye bye.